The question is, this debate, has the ideas machine broken down? Is there an innovation crisis? Is there less of it going on than there used to be? We're going to hear from two speakers on this. So our first guest is Tyler Cowen, who is an economist at George Mason University and a leading light of the economics blogosphere. So Tyler Cowen, please come and join me. OK, so this idea that the ideas machine has broken down. You are the author, among other things, of a book called The Great Stagnation. What is the case for there being a problem here, a slowdown in innovation?
There's an anecdotal case and a numerical case. The anecdotal case is simple. My grandmother was born in 1905. In the first 50 years of her life, she saw radio, antibiotics, electricity, flush toilets, airplanes, everything come into her life. Everything changed. I'm now 51 years old. In the first 50 years of my life, we've had one big change, the internet, and really relatively little else. TV shows from the 1970s, they look and feel quite familiar to me. But let's consider the numerical version of the argument. Taken from The Economist, I might add, the excellent free exchange feature. There's a whole series of recent papers on productivity. And for instance, you can see that since the year 2000, median or typical household income in this country has fallen by over 8%. Productivity is down by multiple measures. And quite simply, there's so much talk at this session about anecdotes, and people come in and talk about what their cool friends are doing in a lab here or there, or isn't it great living in Silicon Valley, in New York, and Brooklyn. But you look at the actual numbers, median income is down, productivity is down, innovation is down, all by the best ways we can measure them.
OK, well, let's start with the anecdotal side of that. So this idea that the kitchen, we heard from Ryan, this is an example in your book, that the kitchen you have now looks pretty similar to a kitchen from 50 years ago. But couldn't you also say that a wheel you have now looks very similar to a wheel from Mesopotamia 5,000 years ago? So is that really a helpful analogy? I mean, chairs, they haven't really changed since medieval times, but that doesn't lead me to conclude that there's some sort of crisis in chairs.
Chairs are much more comfortable than they were in 1920. Have you ever tried a really old chair? But in the last 20 years, chairs aren't actually that much better. Or take a kitchen. The question is,
there is a crisis in chairs. They've stopped getting better. Oh my God, I hadn't realized.
What do you do with the kitchen? I cook in a 1950s kitchen. It's fine. My daughter can tell you, I don't know how to use the microwave. That's like one small advance. It's, again, nothing compared to the progress of the early 20th century.
OK, well, the anecdotal case is hard to argue because we can both pick our examples. I can say smartphone, you can say kitchen. The numbers, we arrive at the idea that there's a decline in innovation sort of through a God of the gaps theory, don't we? Because we say there are things that can cause growth, there's more labor, there's more capital, and there's more innovation. And if we're not getting as much growth, we're not getting as much productivity growth, and we're putting in more labor and more capital, then the problem must be that there's less innovation. That's essentially the argument, isn't it?
But that's just one measure. We look at income measures. We look at male wages. Median male wage is down since 1969. We look at crop yields, a totally different way of measuring the phenomenon. We see basically the same problem. So it's not that the case is being made on the basis of a single number. It's a whole host of numbers all pointing in the same direction.
So what about the fact that if you look at our smartphones and so on, they're just an anomaly, are they? They are the thing that is blinding us to the fact that there is this crisis everywhere else.
Absolutely, and we're sitting here near Silicon Valley. A lot of you work in IT. A lot of you are entrepreneurs. You're what I call infovores. You love information. It feels like there's a lot of progress. But let me tell you, I've presented these ideas in northern Ohio and been pilloried for being an optimist. There's a selection bias in who is here to listen to this, and I urge you to try to wipe your minds a bit clean of your actual lives. They are unrepresentative.
There you go. Excellent, excellent.
And I'm debating with a billionaire.
Yeah.
He's going to come out and give you the case for optimism. What does that say? They had to get a billionaire to do it.
Well, allow me to go on playing devil's advocate here. We heard from Jeff Jarvis there, who was billed as Ryan Abbott, but then we heard from Jeff Jarvis. I think we were supposed to hear from him at the end. But he makes this point, and it's quite a nice one. The idea that we are, this is like the 1470s, that the benefits of printing took an awful lot of time to come through. Similarly, we heard from Chris Anderson this morning, the Industrial Revolution was a sort of multi-decade process. You can say that it starts in the 1750s or so and goes up to the early 20th century, the first Industrial Revolution. isn't it possible that the benefits that are associated with computerization are just taking longer to come through than we expect? I mean, some people say, oh, that just proves that there aren't any, but isn't it possible that there is actually improvement in productivity to come in areas like healthcare and education and government, which aren't really using technology very efficiently at the moment?
Possible and indeed likely, but you mentioned the Industrial Revolution. For that to show up in significant real wage gains took about 70 years. And right now we're at frontiers where a lot of the problems are behavioral. There's great education online now, and it's free. But do people have the discipline to use it? A lot of the problems of healthcare, they are behavioral. So just throwing more tech at it will yield some returns, but you need to get people to do the right thing, take the right medicine, want to study, and that will prove a lot harder. So yes, this will come eventually, but it's probably going to take quite a while.
Hang on a minute, though. Aren't you saying that isn't it possible these behavioral explanations explain why we haven't had this productivity growth then? Everyone's playing solitaire on Facebook when they should be. I mean, I'm just not saying this is the case, but couldn't that be an explanation rather than a lack of innovation? We're just attributing everything to a lack of innovation here.
It's that we're now at frontiers. We're making a lot of things, and manufacturing really is cheap, but those are gains of the past. We're faced with problems in education and healthcare, and we see regulation, excess regulation, lack of accountability, behavioral problems, and tech stagnation all coming together. It's a big interlocked mess. It just won't be as easy to fix as having one heroic entrepreneur come around with a new gadget. That's what I'm saying.
So what can we do? If we buy your thesis that there really is a problem here, what's your prescription for how we solve it?
We need to respect science much, much more than we do. We need a very fundamental realignment of our outlook. Go back in a way to the early 1960s, how science was respected then. We need to significantly deregulate some, not all, parts of our economy. Most of all, it comes down to science.
So it's this sort of fear of science, or sort of willful turning away from its consequences.
We've grown afraid of risk-taking, and we're too self-congratulatory about all of our social progress, which is a good thing. All of our tolerance, lower crime. There are many good things about modern life which are not tech. And we've become too complacent. Some of our key intellectual cities, like Washington, have in a sense become too nice because too much money is spent there. And so our intelligentsia is in a kind of stupor.
Excellent. If you go back to the 60s, and the higher respect that people had for science there, as you put it, how much of that is because the government was behind it with things like the Apollo program? I mean, an awful lot of the things that we saw happening in the 20th century were the result of government spending, whether it was for military reasons in the Cold War, or things like backing of the original version of the internet, or the Apollo program. So how much is government spending a factor in this?
Quite a bit. When I was a kid, I was 7, I watched them walk on the moon. I thought, this is only the beginning. I was thrilled. Even at 7, I knew what a big deal it was. And at age 7, I turned out to be wrong. I guess that was like, first mistake as econo-pundit. 7-year-old Tyler, walk on the moon, only the beginning. It was the end of an era. And in a sense, we've given up thinking big. We never turned nuclear power into something useful or safe or whatever. Energy costs more, transportation is slower, and we're still flying planes designed in the late 1960s. If people back then knew that, they would be shocked.
There you go. It's depressing, isn't it? We're doomed. How much of this, when you say we, how much of this is a US-specific problem, and how much of this is a global problem?
Growth has slowed down in virtually all advanced nations, unless they're selling resources, like Norway. And then the price being high means other people have slower growth. There's been a lot of catch-up growth, copy growth, China, India. That's all great news. There's a lot of good news in the world, but it is not good news about new technological innovation. It's news about poorer countries managing to copy and catch up. Again, that's wonderful, but it's a very different question from whether we are really moving the ball forward other than smartphones and one sector, the tech sector, and we are not.
Well, can I just make the case for smartphones being more than just things you play Angry Birds on? If you look at the impact of smartphones in the developing world, they essentially substitute for poor infrastructure, and there seems to be a clear link with economic growth. They encourage entrepreneurship. There are these lovely natural experiments on the coast of Kerala that show how it make fishermen's lives easier, and so on. So something that looks like a sort of fairly trivial improvement to us. I remember someone from MTN in Uganda saying, for you it's incremental, for us it's revolutionary. So the same technology can actually be be a massive step forward in a different part of the world, just not here, can't it? So isn't the smartphone something that is potentially extremely beneficial in the developing world?
When it comes to the developing world, there is really massive evidence for optimism. Smartphones is part of that, but only a small part of it. But absolutely, most developing nations have done extremely well over the last 20 years, and we should all be delighted by that. Their progress is more important than our loss, but nonetheless, we're kind of pathetic. I don't mean to insult anyone here, but we're in a little bit of a fog. Look at the late 19th century. Most people are not getting out of high school. They don't have foundations. They don't have peer review. They don't have whatever else we moderns might be proud of. And when it comes to innovation, they kicked our butt by an order of magnitude.
So necessity, mother of invention. We need what, a crisis then? More of a crisis than we have now. We seem to have a pretty good one.
We need a different social code of priorities. We need less aversion to risk-taking, and we need less regulation.
Okay, well, on that gloomy note, I'm going to ask Naveen Jain, who is going to give us a slightly more optimistic point of view, to come and join us on the stage. Naveen Jain.
Well,
so, Naveen, what do you think of this? It's terrible. All of this technology is just, we're amusing ourselves to death. We're all living in a bubble. I can't remember the other one. We're in a fog. It sounds terrible. What do you think?
Well, I think about it. When you are in the dark, you see monsters until somebody comes with a flashlight and shows you what's actually there. So ignorance always makes you very pessimistic because you really don't know what's happening. So let me tell you what is actually going on. We are living in the age of abundance and innovation. Everything in front of your eyes in the next 10 to 15 years will completely change the way you are doing things today. Every industry, I don't care what industry you are in, it is going to be disrupted with an innovation. So let's start talking about what are those things that are happening. Tyler talked about the education and the healthcare, that really nothing much has changed. But imagine what is going to happen. The things that you're so used to, the UC Berkeley or the Harvard or the Princetons, none of these schools will exist if they don't change.
All right.
Oh, and
there you go. It's the future calling. Yeah.
So future just told me what is really going to happen will be.
Your time-traveling phone. So, well, this is all great. It's great that you're sort of such a professional optimist. And but I asked Tyler for evidence for his gloom, and he gave me lots of evidence.
Of course.
Agricultural yields, all sorts of productivity gains, all of this. So, what's your evidence for being so optimistic?
Very, very simple. So, if you look at this thing, you can look at all this mumbo jumbo, which is called the productivity. Ultimately, it is the quality of life.
It's called economics, actually.
Well, actually, it's called quality of. It's the measurement. How you're measuring that is completely wrong. So, in some sense, the gain in productivity comes from mass merchandising. When you start to get to individual things, the productivity comes down. So, for example, today you have a single drug that supposedly supposed to work for every single individual. That's how you get productivity. You take the same education system and apply to every child like a massive conveyor belt on production. You group them by the date of manufacturing. You're 9 years old, you go here. You're 10 years old, go here. And you move them from station to station. That's how the productivity comes from.
Well,
but personalization is what makes the quality of life better, which is what allows you to do the better things and better innovation. And every time you do the individual and personalization, you see the less productivity, but the better quality of life. So imagine if you can have a drug that's designed just for you, not for everybody else, and it's 100% efficacy rate. And that, to me, is not about productivity. It's about making individuals' life better.
Unfortunately, it's only something you're imagining at this point. So it's, you can. I know you think that this is going to happen, but you're just sort of
happening. Go out and get the flashlight.
Okay, well, where? So where's the evidence for this?
So, Tom, so evidence actually is already starting to see. So you're starting to see now the healthcare diagnostic that was done by the doctor. More and more stuff is being done actually by the devices and the sensors and the blood tests and things along those lines. It's very likely that in the next 10 years, you're going to have a $25 tablet device or a $10 tablet device attached to the sensors with the microfluidic sensors. You'll be able to diagnose most common diseases with pennies or sub-pennies better than a physician, because a physician makes too many errors. We as humans are just not good at that. Today, your primary care physician makes 40% of the time the mistake. You know why? Because they drink. They are tired. Right?
My wife's a doctor, so I have direct experience of this. And yeah, she does drink, but not while she's working. But this is, once again, optimism from you. We heard from Peter Diamandis earlier on. They have the Tricorder X Prize. There are, whatever it is, 200 teams trying to build these things. That's all great, but it's not happening now. So, but what strikes me is
that happening now. I can show you the devices that exist today on the smartphone able to diagnose the thing. I have seen them myself. They're able to measure them. Imagine your world. You walk into your house. Every part of your floor actually nothing but a sensor device. Imagine your tiles, right? Now let's talk about education. You've seen the massive online courses. It is already starting to happen, and you will find that all of those things, the fundamental problem is the human mind is local and linear, because that is what was needed for survival when you all grew up. Whereas these technologies are growing exponentially, and like anything else, in the early stage of exponential growth, it looks like nothing is happening. So 0.1 becomes 0.2, becomes 0.4. You don't see it until it hits the knee of the curve, and then you say, oh, that came from nowhere. So that must have been the overnight success.
Okay, so what makes you so optimistic that the next decade is going to be so great? What is it that's driving this? What's changing it? I mean, waving your hands and saying exponential technologies. What is it in particular?
So fundamentally, things that are changing is more brains are coming online. So imagine.
So this is Diamandis again, 2 billion to 5 billion people.
Well, that's not it. Remember, everybody says that 2 minds are better than 1. Imagine 2 billion minds. Not only they were never heard from, they were only the consumer of the things. Now they're the producer of ideas. So when you have the producer of these ideas, the billions of people whose ideas were never heard, their ideas can be heard. You see the tremendous amount of innovation that's going to come out of these people. And the reason the human mind cannot understand is because we think linearly, we cannot think exponentially. So start to think about the things that look very small today. When they happen, that's the reason people say Pinterest came out of nowhere. Pinterest has been around for 8 years. Every one of these companies that looks like an overnight success have been around for 8-10 years. And that's what it takes to do it. And smart people see that exponential growth when they're small, and they start to see that's what's happening. So the wearable computing is going to fundamentally change the way you become the CEO of your own health. You start to take control of that. You start to look at the education. The 3D printing fundamentally changes the way the things are done. In developing countries, when you buy an appliance, the reason you can't use it because you can't buy a spare part. What if the spare part can be produced right there? Instead of taking everything in the space station that we take because something might break, what if we only took a 3D printer and you're able to print whatever part breaks? It changes the game. What if you're able to find the resources on the moon and bring it back to Earth?
Oh, this is another of your projects, going to the moon. Before we get to that, I wanted to put this question to Tyler. This idea that more people, connected to the internet and sort of greater potential for them to have ideas and collaborate, that's potentially a source of growth and more productivity in the future, isn't it?
Potentially, but that theory and everything he has said predicts that right now productivity should be slowly rising, and it is not. It is falling or flat. We've had more people for a while now. This isn't new. And economically speaking, look at incomes for the typical household, look at measurements of productivity. For the last 13 years at least, they are down. They are consistently down across the Western world and Japan. Look at Japan, an advanced economy, 25 years, not very much growth. That's indicative of a more general slowdown. And there are a lot of hypotheticals about what could happen someday. And yes, it will happen someday. But we don't see it in the numbers yet. We see the opposite. So I would urge you all to think long and hard about when that someday is coming and why is it it's not in the numbers right now.
But Tyler, you're measuring the wrong thing. It's like saying there are less number of horses and carts on the street, so things must not be working well, right? It's because you're measuring the wrong thing. That's not how you should be measuring what is the innovation is happening. Innovation is not measured by the productivity. Just like the transportation, innovation in transportation is not measured by how many horses are drawing the carts, right? So I think productivity is a wrong way of measuring the innovation.
In other good times, real incomes of the typical households went up. Right now, they're going down.
So let me tell you one thing. So the point is, it's not about the income, it is what that money buys. So if you go back and look at 10 years ago and you said, I wanted a device that is I'm able to communicate anywhere I am, it must have a GPS device, it should have a way for me to speak to it, you would have spent $100,000 to get that device that you can carry in your pocket for $200. So the fact is the income may not be rising, but the quality of life and what you're getting for the same amount of money is tremendously rising. So $1,000 buys you today more what the $100,000 bought 10 years ago. So the fact is people are able to use the money more effectively, and that's how you should be measuring the innovation, not because how much money you're making.
The real income takes that into account, absolutely. And look at the areas that are tougher for an ordinary budget. Healthcare, it costs much more. There are some advances, but actually antibiotics are becoming much less effective and rapidly. The cost of buying a home in a good school district, it's much harder than it was, say, 30 years ago. So there's a lot actually that's moving backwards. Traffic time, congestion. So GPS is great, but when you add it all up and look at real income for typical household, again, that's gone down.
But the point is, you still believe that people have to have the house in the good school district because school district will become irrelevant. It is every single of these things they're talking about, it becomes irrelevant because it doesn't matter where the school is because school will come to you.
Do your kids live in a good school district?
No.
Take a wild guess.
They do not.
Where do they go to school then?
They go to school in a totally different city.
The best school district of them all.
Yeah, exactly. Not entirely representative inhabitants of Earth, possibly, sitting on my left. I'd like to ask the audience, we'd like to open things up to questions, but before we do, I'd like to ask those of you who think there is a crisis in innovation, tell me, raise your hands if you think there's a crisis in innovation. You agree broadly with Tyler? Oh, come on. Come on. Oh, I think we have someone at the back. No, it might be the Sandman signaling. No, it's not. It's all right. So, and OK, who agrees with Naveen that everything is going to get better and better? We live in the best possible world of all worlds.
Come on, guys. You could do better than that.
OK, do we have any questions from the floor?
Vijay.
We have a wavy hand up there. Is the microphone is going to take a million years to get to you over there? No, it's all right. It's coming. It's coming. You know, in the future, we're going to have drone microphones that fly. Yeah. It's totally going to happen. Seriously, when we're doing this event in 2018, we'll have drones.
Yeah. OK, I've got a question. It feels to me like a lot of the innovation is all about, you know, in the machine. It's in the computer, it's on the internet, it's smartphones, you know, everything we can do with smartphones. But to Tyler's point about the quality of life in some ways going down, why aren't we seeing more innovation, say, to manage traffic flow? So, you know, people aren't spending 2 and 3 hours in their cars every day, you know, and could actually be doing something useful with that time. I don't feel like I see a lot of innovation on the street. I see it all in the computer and in the smartphone.
Actually, it's happening already. So if you know that there are going to be the driverless cars, and it's already online. So Google has driven the car more than 300,000 miles. And the car, you can sit and do your work. And it actually is able to drive better than the humans because humans are just not designed. Their brains were not designed to drive a car in the traffic. That's not what we were doing when we were living in the savannas.
A lot of our problems are institutional. So you mentioned traffic. We could and should have congestion pricing, as does Singapore, as does London. It works. We won't do it. Our institutions are stuck. Driverless cars do have potential. But I ask you, the first time such a driverless car runs down a kid and the family sues General Motors rather than the owner of the car, what then happens? I've talked to people who work on driverless cars, and many of them believe USA is about the last country those cars will ever come to.
Well, they're already
driving.
We
have so much litigation.
But it's already happening.
Yeah, but we had this with private aircraft, because when a private aircraft crashes into a house, the pilot's dead, and so no one wants to sue his family because it's kind of not very nice. So then they sue the aircraft maker instead, so that the aircraft makers have to have bigger and bigger liability insurance, and then the cost of aircraft goes up. And eventually they go to the government and say, please take this problem away. And and they do. But it's interesting that you see the failings of government as a problem and the failings of institutions. And you see it as an opportunity because you say, look how useless the government is, look how useless education is, look how useless healthcare is. It must be about to be disrupted.
Actually, the interesting thing as an entrepreneur, every time you see a problem, the light bulb goes up, opportunity. Because it's really, really easy to create a billion-dollar company, and I can tell you how to make a billion-dollar company. Anybody interested here?
Go on then, go on, tell us.
Solve a $10 billion problem, right? It's really, really easy. So go out and find these big problems. So when Tyler comes and say education is effed up, go fix the damn thing. There's $1 billion to be made.
Well, go on then, do it. Get on with it. Oh, sorry, you're going to the moon. I'd forgotten about that.
Right. We can talk about the moon too.
Yes, exactly. Who is next? Do we have another question? Yes, we have a question at the back up there. Go ahead, please. And please tell us who you are before you start.
Yeah. Bruce Goldberg, Genentech. Isn't it clearly possible that both of you are right, that we have a crisis in our institutions and public way of life, and we have unbelievable innovation going on in the private elements of our life, both at the same time?
Yes, could that explain the poor productivity? Could it just be these kind of dysfunctional public institutions, healthcare system, government, and then actually the private sector is doing great?
That's part of the story, but the other part, I think, is that implementation takes a long time. You look at the history of electricity, the history of the private car. If you look at the early industrial revolution, to have really big payoffs in terms of living standards, in all of those cases, it has taken multiple decades longer than people have thought. When we go back in the history, something new happens, and a lot of people jump on the bandwagon, and they say, just around the corner, just around the corner. But it isn't. Many things have to change, including institutions. And I'm saying these benefits are, for the most part, really not just around the corner.
Well, so let me tell you that I think what's happening is the large corporations are being disrupted faster than ever. Who would have thought the companies like Kodak that have been around for hundreds of years suddenly will go out of business? So the companies that are not innovating and the companies that are not thinking straight are going out of business faster than ever. So in some sense, the new companies, the innovation is coming around, and the billions of dollars of companies are being created in 3-4 years, and the large companies are going completely out, being disrupted. And the problem is because a lot of the CEOs of the large companies always look at the problem the wrong way. They look at the things, their competition comes from other people in the similar industry. They go to the same trade conferences. But what's happening is the disruption comes from outside their industry. So it's the non-experts that come up with a disruptive solution, not the experts. And every time we have a problem, we go to the expert. And experts are very bad. Experts are good at two things: telling you either some incremental evolution or telling you why a good idea just won't work. It is a crazy idea. Right? Every idea is a crazy idea until the breakthrough. Then it's an obvious idea. Then everybody says it was an obvious idea. So the point is, for example, healthcare, the disruption is not going to come from other healthcare industry. Once you start to sequence the genome, the epigenome, the proteome and microbiomes, then in that case it becomes a big data problem, and the competition is going to come from the Googles of the world or the Microsofts of the world or some other big data company, not from the Merck or the Pfizers of the world.
We've already got Google making cars for something, but presumably they want to sell the OS to the car makers. Who knows? Do we have another question from the floor? Yes, up here, please.
My name is Martin Apple. I have my picture of what you have just described is a football field in which each of you is running to the opposite goalpost. And when you get there, you each score points. Now, if you look at the real question that would be answered, if you start thinking through it, the question is, it doesn't matter whether either of you is the right or the wrong, because I think you both have a lot of right, and you have some things that I wouldn't agree with. But if you both could sit there and figure out how to get there from here, that is, what kind of thing could we do to stimulate that kind of innovation that you think we need? If we were to create an education system whose outcome might be the quality of student who could conceive of industries that didn't exist, who was capable of taking jobs that haven't even been thought of yet, who would be the employer instead of employee, how would you do it?
Well, government is the problem. Government is not the solution. So if you can let the private industries go out and start to build the solutions and start to not put the regulations too ahead of the things, it's like, going back to my idea, if you keep thinking that you have no right to be able to mine the moon, you can't go ahead and do that. So you have to allow people to be able to be creative and do things that they do best, private industries, and come up with the innovative solutions before you put the regulation. So regulation should always come once the industry has matured, and allowing the, for example, in this country, the reason that we can't get good drugs is because of the FDA and all the regulations that get in the way, and that's why lots of the innovations are happening outside the country. So we need to deregulate a lot of this stuff. We need to take a chill pill and let the government out of the way.
My God, I think you two agree on that, because you're also a fan of deregulation, as is the Economist.
I agree, but I would just point out the key areas: education, healthcare, energy supply, rent, cheap housing. There are so many veto points accumulated, and they're piling up faster than we're getting rid of them. That is a big part of the problem. But it's not easy to become a billionaire in those areas.
It is trivial to become a billionaire. Again, go out and solve big problems. Remember, today, you're looking at a person who came from India with $5 in their pocket, could not speak the language, a person who grew up with no food to eat. If I can go out and do this, I can go out and dream about going to the moon and mine the moon, anybody can do it.
There you go. I think we have time for one more question up here.
I think one of the ways in which many people would argue the benefits of innovation should be measured is by measuring surplus. And I think that was also one of the things that Naveen was talking about, measuring the surplus that is accruing to people from the quality of things being improving. So how would you address that in measuring economic statistics to prove or disprove the benefits of innovation?
Tyler, perhaps you could respond on that one.
Well, that's what real income tries to measure, is what are the gains you have? What is the command over a basket of goods and services? And we find in some key areas our world is moving backwards. In some other areas it's moving forwards. But the summary statistic of real income is doing exactly that. And again, for typical households, that has rather consistently been going down for at least 13 years, with an interruption for the bubble years when it goes up and then it goes down again. And that, to me, is the single strongest piece of evidence for pessimism here. And it's taking into account the fact that we have GPS and smartphones.
But look at the corporations now have $1.5 trillion in their balance sheet. And they're still bankrupt. And you know why they're bankrupt? Because their ideas bankrupt. They have no ideas. So large corporations have lots of cash, but no ideas. And that's the reason why people in this room who have brilliant ideas can go out there and disrupt these corporations with lots of cash because their ideas bankrupt.
Okay, I just had one thing on the surplus. We had a very nice free exchange column a couple of weeks ago about measuring the surplus that accrues from the internet and how difficult it is. There are lots of different ways of doing it. They all disagree with each other, but it's a very interesting question to ask. Okay, thank you very much indeed to Tyler Cowen and Naveen Jain.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you.